Whether you want to admit it or not, Ursula was technically the rightful ruler of Atlantica, or at least one of the rightful rulers, according to the various versions of the Little Mermaid that exist. When the kingdom was passed down from the god Poseidon to his children, he didn't plan on it all going to his younger son Triton. In fact, if Ursula had been given the Trident instead of the Nautilus Shell when she was younger, the entire world of the Little Mermaid would have been vastly different from the one fans have grown to love. This has gotten me to think that maybe there was a reason why Ursula wasn't gifted the Trident in the first place. But be warned, her father's reasoning was just as messed up as the sea witch herself. You see, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and much like Triton was shown to be in The Little Mermaid, his father was likely just as superficial as he was. All they cared about was how great things looked or seemed on the outside. This was shown with Triton in The Little Mermaid as well as in the Broadway play, but no media has really touched on the subject quite as much as Serena Valentino's novel Poor Unfortunate Soul, Tale of the Sea Witch. In the book, which acted as a sort of prequel to The Little Mermaid, Triton was shown from Ursula's perspective, and for once the world got to see how truly horrible he was to her. I mean, there was even a point in the book where, after he allowed her back into the kingdom for a brief period of time, he demanded that Ursula take on the appearance of an actual mermaid. According to the book, Triton couldn't stand how ugly Ursula's tentacle-covered form was, and he had no problem letting her know. Meanwhile, Ursula despised looking like a mermaid, and the book revealed that she felt much more comfortable in her octopus form. And it's hard not to wonder if that's because of the ridiculous expectations that were put on her by her own brother and possibly even her father. And I know you might be thinking that Ursula's father couldn't have been too bad if he gave her a powerful artifact like the Nautilus Shell, but you have to remember the shell wasn't nearly as important as the Trident that went to his favorite son. As the story goes, at least according to the Broadway musical, Triton and Ursula were both the children of the Greek god Poseidon. And if you look at the Greek mythos of Poseidon, you'll see that one of his children, King Triton, was much more like the Greek god than Ursula was. According to mythology, Poseidon's personality can be described as having a bad temper, which was a poor quality of Triton's that was displayed multiple times throughout the original movie. On top of that, Poseidon was said to have mood swings much like his son did, and the pair also shared a violent temper. In The Little Mermaid, the sailors at the beginning of the movie described their fear that Triton would drag their ship down into the depths of the ocean because of his rage. Well, according to the stories of Poseidon, that's exactly what he was known for. He was believed to be the cause of every harsh storm that ever happened out at sea, and every ship that went down was said to have suffered from the wrath of the sea god. So, if Poseidon shared those qualities with his son, it likely means that Triton learned them from his father, which also implies that Triton learned other bad habits from him as well, including the way he treated those he believed were outwardly ugly, like Ursula. In fact, according to the Broadway musical for The Little Mermaid, Ursula firmly believed that she was Poseidon's least favorite child, which caused her to do some brutal things, but I'll get into that soon. For now, we still need to wonder, why did Triton get the Trident instead of Ursula? Or, more importantly, why was the Trident so much more powerful than the Nautilus Shell? When you break down the differences between the two mystical artifacts that Poseidon left behind, there's really no question that the Trident was more powerful than the shell that Ursula was given. And the fact that Poseidon chose to give the Trident to his temperamental son could easily be perceived as him favoring Triton over his other children, something that Ursula could never gain from him. When it comes to the Trident, it's unclear if Disney has shown the full extent of its powers, but from what's known, it's a godlike item that would be hard for anything to oppose. The Trident was shown as having a whole bag of tricks up its sleeve, including the fact that it could fire energy bolts that seemed like underwater lightning. It also had the power to change the shape and size of whoever wielded it, otherwise known as megathoskinesis. Disney showed us that the Trident is capable of conjuring things such as rainbows in the sky, and it even has the power to levitate objects as well as merpeople and other aquatic animals. And that's just scratching the surface. Something tells me that the Trident has countless other powers that haven't even been revealed yet. Meanwhile, the Nautilus Shell that was gifted to Ursula was much more lacking. As far as Disney has shown fans, Ursula's shell only had two powers. The first is the ability to take away, store, and even transfer someone's voice, such as when Ursula took Ariel's voice and then used it for herself. The only other power that we know for a fact the Nautilus Shell has is the ability to hypnotize anyone who comes in contact with the user. And while those powers are both very strong, song, neither of them really compare to the countless powers that the Trident had. So why did Poseidon choose to give the Trident to his son rather than his daughter, who was actually the elder child? Well, believe it or not, there was actually a deeper meaning when it came to passing down the Trident along with the rest of the kingdom to Atlantica, and it didn't quite go down as Poseidon had planned it. You see, according to the book Poor Unfortunate Soul, the kingdom was never supposed to go to Triton, but instead he was supposed to split it down the middle with his sister. Knowing Triton's character, though, this was something that he would never be okay with. Instead of allowing Ursula to rule alongside him and share the kingdom, Triton decided to take matters into his own hands. If you remember, in the beginning of The Little Mermaid, Ursula had been banished to the unprotected portions of the sea where she was forced to live in exile away from the kingdom. Well, there's a good chance that she was banished specifically because King Triton didn't like her, and certainly didn't like the idea of sharing half his kingdom with her. In fact, there are even some versions of the story, such as Poor Unfortunate Soul, where it's explained that King Triton banished Ursula before he was the king. You see, according to the story, when both Triton and Ursula were younger, Triton let his sister go adrift and be separated from her family, which is what forced her to grow up as an orphan on land. And even though she had an adoptive father who loved her, it doesn't mean that Triton didn't take action to banish her from her own family, all on the pretenses that she was ugly and would become evil. Well, if Poseidon knew that, don't you think he would have done something about it, and possibly even punished Triton by not giving him the Trident or the kingdom of Atlantica? When it came down to it, the sea god simply didn't care for the sole messed up reason that Ursula was his least favorite child. You see, one of the best things about the Broadway musical version of The Little Mermaid was the fact that they added a few songs here and there to give certain characters more backstory or depth. Ursula happened to be one of those characters, and she was actually given 2 songs. The first was called I Want the Good Times Back, and delved into the idea that Ursula's father split the kingdom in 2 halves for her and Triton. Only in the end, Triton ended up banishing her, resulting in Ursula wanting the good times back. Now, after a good run on Broadway, the musical changed things up and actually swapped out I Want the Good Times Back with a much darker song, Daddy's Little Angel. And I know what you're thinking. The name is so sweet, how can it possibly be a bad song? Well, the song was basically Ursula's way of confessing to the audience that she murdered her 6 older sisters. To make things worse, she did so because she apparently knew how much her father disliked her compared to her other sisters, which is probably why he chose not to give Ursula the Trident, despite her technically being the elder child. Throughout the song, Ursula mentioned that her father found her to be loathsome and disgusting, while also explaining that she had to watch as all of her siblings were adored by him aside from her. This led her to do the unspeakable, which included putting her father's first favorite daughter on ice. She then went on to sing about killing daughter number 2 by throwing her into a whirlpool. The trend continued. Ursula claimed to kill 2 more of her sisters by having them wash up on shore, and then the last 2 simply disappeared, never to be found. However, even Ursula knew that it didn't make her father love her. As horrible as all of this is, it's clear that Poseidon wasn't fond of Ursula, which is probably why he chose not to leave the Trident to her. Much like Poseidon, the Trident was likely a very valuable possession of his, and he knew how powerful it was, so there was no way that he would leave it to a daughter that he couldn't trust or even learn to love. What do you think, though? Was there more to Poseidon's decision to give his son the Trident instead of Ursula? Or was he just a messed up father who decided to pick favorites? Be sure to let me know in the comments below.